Your movie today, Mike, is a little toxic spill called Horror of Party Beach.
This time we watched Season 8, Episode 17, The Horror of Party Beach.
In which loads of teenagers get killed by a monster to a jaunty tune.
So jaunty.
So jaunty.
But before we talk about that, we should do a little follow-up.
Ooh, okay.
We got some feedback from our last episode, which, as you'll recall, was a Season 8 episode that you really didn't like.
Yeah, and I understand I've joined the super exclusive hosts of It's Just a Show who doesn't like a popular episode. So, woohoo! I'm happy to know why it was a popular episode. So, is that what we got feedback about?
Well, sort of. We got feedback from Emma, who's written to us a few times, and it's always lovely to hear from her. And she wrote in, so I know you don't tend to love the sci-fi episodes. There are a few really strong ones that are favorites of mine, which, by the way, absolutely true. There are some very strong sci-fi episodes that are favorites of mine as well.
Excellent.
Anyway, she writes, I really liked this one when it first came out. I recently rewatched it, and I gotta say, some things hold up and some don't.
That seems like most media that came out inside of the 90s, and the aughts, so that works out.
Absolutely. And she lists some of the pros of it, including the jack-in-the-box sounds that Servo makes and the merry-go-round sounds for the part of the Crankor ship are very funny.
She's right.
Yep. That the movie is very silly, and that makes the episode fun. It's also why Gamera vs. Giron is her favorite Gamera.
See, maybe that's what it was. I just didn't find the movie very silly. I found it kind of dull. So, I got to change my mindset when I watch it next time.
I think it can be both silly and dull.
Sure.
I mean, is pretty fun, and he is adorable, but it's also really boring, especially in the middle.
Yeah. Anyway, she says more, I'm sure.
Yeah, she says that the host segments are fun, and she says, I almost never like the sci-fi era host segments.
Nice. And maybe it's because it was separate from the movie that they were better segments. I don't know. The wormhole was fun.
And says the appearance of Crankor, of Phantom at the end, is great, as his return in a future episode, Neptune Men. Loved Bill as Crankor. And the cons were, there were a lot of riffs making fun of Japanese culture that I found hilarious when I was 17, that I now find really gross and lazy.
Yeah. Well, and I think that was something that you commented on quite a bit when we were going through the episode, too.
Yes. And I wrote back to him. I was like, I'm in full agreement. Like, these are all things I agree with. I know you didn't find the movie quite as fun as many people do, but I think it is still a silly movie that has lots of fun to it. I can absolutely see the sort of standout moments that make this a memorable episode.
And certainly the bumper sticker they ended up with the, we liked it very much. I mean, it's a good line. You were right. They repeat it a little bit too often, but that's a cool line to reference back to.
I have found myself saying it again and again in the week since we made that episode. So there you go.
Is it going to become a new dull surprise for us? Because dull surprise seems to come up quite a bit for us.
Also, Emma notes that Mario Land 2 Six Golden Coins is a great game, as well as the Wario Land spin-off series, which is almost certainly true, and I promised her that I would go and play them on my emulator at some point soon, which I have not had a chance to do yet, but someday I will.
Mm-hmm. We'll get back to you, Emma.
Exactly. We also got some notes from people who were, less kind, as generally somebody comes out of the woodwork when we put out an episode about a sci-fi era show that we didn't care for, and people question whether we like MST3K at all. And so I guess I better check in. Charlotte, do you like MST3K?
I do. I do like MST3K. How about you, Chris? Do you like MST3K?
Yeah, it's like my favorite show.
Yeah.
Or it's the most important show in my life, and I like it very much.
We like it very much.
I don't know what to say. I've spent quite a lot of time and energy on this podcast if I didn't like the show, but I suppose that's always possible. This could be some sort of long con hate fest.
I mean, there are people who devote their lives to hating things. I'm pleased that you aren't one of them, though.
Yeah, it just sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
Anyway, in other news, it's Halloween. It's Halloween.
Yay, Halloween. It's like A Wonderful Season.
I think it's a little overrated, but I did appreciate that MST3K just put out their first official Halloween episode with season 13, episode 11, The Mask in 3D.
3D. How was The Mask in 3D, Chris?
It was pretty great, I gotta say. Our friends over at a part of our Scaritage, which includes friend of the show, Adam, former and perennial host of the show, Adam, did an episode on this movie a long time ago because it is CanCon. It's the first Canadian horror movie.
Ooh.
And it's from 1961, I believe, which also makes it the current reigning champion in terms of how old the movie was when the MST3K episode of it was released.
Oh, so it's not the oldest movie that MST3K has ever done, obviously, but relative to having it released into the world, it is?
Yes, I believe it was 61 years between movie release and episode release, and they both got released around Halloween, so almost exactly 61 years, which is more time than any of the older movies that came out in the 90s. So, interesting.
Yeah. And yet the 60s still just doesn't seem like it was that long ago. Not that I ever lived through the 60s, but it still seems like it is present inside of our cultural memory.
Yes. It was a fun riff. It was a pretty fun movie, especially when the 3D segments came in. So it's mostly not in 3D, but when one of the characters puts on the mask, you are told to also put on your mask, which is to say your 3D glasses for these really wonderful, surrealistic sequences that take place. And it's really effective. Like, it's good. It's actually good. I'm super happy about it.
That's amazing because 3D never seems to turn out well. I mean, I'm thinking specifically now of Jaws 3D because I totally saw Jaws 3D in the theater and I totally shouldn't have because of my age. But like, Jaws 3D was terrible. I mean, it was just like cheap ways of using the 3D to just be like, oh, here's a severed arm floating in the ocean and it whoosh comes out towards you, Like, no, it was just a ridiculously cheap effect. And I'm pleased to hear that in apparently 1961, they got it better than they got it in the 80s.
Yeah, well, because the whole movie isn't in 3D.
Ooh,
just these like weird sequences. And it really does just sort of transport you into this world where things are not quite right because it's in 3D. Mm-hmm. The episode itself, they did the final sketch in 3D as well, which is very cute and charming. I don't know. It's a pretty good episode. I'm excited to talk about it at length some future Halloween. But today, we need to talk about the horror of Party Beach.
Oh, do we have to? This time we watch Season 8, Episode 17, The Horror of Party Beach. The movie opens as Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf in a roadster. George and Martha are driving to a plucky gathering of folks at the beach. Of course, Martha has been drinking. It's a problem. Has always been a problem. George reminds her that they are not kids in school anymore and have to start leading serious, sober lives. But Martha insists she's in it for the kicks, and that's when this movie changes to Side Hackers, or Wild Rebels with a dash of Catalina Caper. There's a band playing at the beach with teenagers dancing, girls in bikinis, and boys in shirts and Speedos. It's wild. Martha, actually now Annette, is shaking what her mother gave her in an attempt to make George, now Frankie, super jealous and to get those kicks. There's a gang of wild rebels with a horny leader who wants Annette since she is clearly of legal age, and lechy dancing ensues. Though to be fair, all the dancing was pretty butt-shaking in the face. Frankie is super jealous and starts fighting the motorcycle gang leader. It ends in a draw. Annette decides to take a swim. And now, suddenly, we are in Revenge of the Creature mixed with Jaws or something. Because Annette gets to the rocky island only to be eaten by the eye bag creature. Did I forget to mention a creature was created from all the radioactive waste the local university dumps into the water, falling on some dead bones? Yeah. So maybe this is more like Toxic Avenger. Wait, no! The movie is now Where the Boys Are, mixed with a tinge of Slumber Party Massacre, since the creature leaves the ocean to kill all the sorority youth. Fortunately, blonde Elaine, that Frankie, actually his name is Hank, was flirting with on the beach, politely declined an invitation to the party in a short on Manners Between Friends, starring Dad. We stay in the horror genre for a while with a monster killing spree until Hank remembers he's a scientist, and so is Elaine's dad. Maybe like a little bit of agent of harm? They find a way to track the monsters using radiation, a la Monster A Go-Go, and a way to kill the monsters using their own decomposing bodies against them. I wish Return of the Dead had found such a handy way to defeat the undead. There's a brief interlude into Song of the South, which is super unnecessary, and then the creatures are defeated with salt bombs a la the headlights of teenagers in Attack of the Eye Creatures, so it's definitely a horror film. Prince Hank Charming wakes sleeping Elaine Beauty, so it's a fairy tale movie now, I guess? Oh, but wait, the radio buzzes in and the band returns to let us know to never steal anything wet. And we find that the beach party was the genre we were in all along. The end.
Meanwhile, on the satellite of love, the ship is no longer in the wormhole, I thought. Or maybe it is, though, because Mike seems to think it is. Anyway, Tom's in a weird outfit and is trying to sing harmony with the fundamental tones of the universe, or something, and it works. A chorus of servo voices arises, and they sing about knowing a hot dog man. Mike finds the speakers that Servo has cleverly hidden just off screen, and the jig is up. But down in Roman times, Pearl and Brain Guy pretend to be the gods, Apurlo and Brain Gaius, in order to appease Flavia and Calipigius and stop them from executing them. And it works. Well, it works on one of them. Flavia isn't so sure, but the Mads get to live. For now. And after some movie, Tom and Crow are ready to go to the beach and do a manly beach dance. They made Mike some trunks to dance in, but the trunks are very, 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 very small, and so Mike is effectively nude. And it's a Season 8 episode, so this is considered horrifying. At halftime, it's a Roman times drinking party, and Flavia is trying to get Apurlo to admit she's not really a god. She asks her to play some music of the gods, and Brain Gaius has them play a hoedown right out of a 90s beef commercial. And after yet more movie, Tom has been inspired by the newsie in the movie with very relevant and up-to-date headlines. He sells Mike a series of papers that keep Mike up to date on the breaking story of Mike buying a series of papers from Servo. And then, after the movie, Mike and the bots regret how little kids today know about sodium. They sing an edutainment doo-wop song that's sure to appeal. Most of the lyrics are, "It's sodium," which is very informative. Back in Roman times, the feast is wrapping up, and Calipigius leads Brain Gaius out to the vomitorium. Flavia and Apurlo are very catty to each other, and things start to get violent between them, and the men return just in time. And Calipigius announces that Apurlo and Brain Gaius have agreed to stay indefinitely. Hurrah! What do you think, sirs?
I love the It's Sodium song. I love the doo-wop that Crow sings. So I'm so pleased.
Oh, yes. The deep voice bit from Crow is very good.
Oh, yes.
Did you enjoy this episode more than the last one?
Oh, my gosh. I enjoyed this episode so much more than the last one. I mean, I guess that's not really hard because I didn't really like the movie last time. And this movie just kept switching up genres all the time. So it seemed fun and fine. And I think also there was just so many more riffs during the segments when the movie started to lag a little bit. And so it had that feeling. It had that feeling of being in the theater with Mike and the bots and riffing along with the movie. It was so much more that feel and that style that I liked from MST3K. How about you?
Yeah, I thought this was a pretty nice episode. I agree that the fact that it kept reminding me of other episodes and other movies that they'd watched really helped. If I was getting bored, I could just say, oh, this is kind of like Catalina Caper.
Sure.
This is kind of like Revenge of the Creature. This is kind of like something else I could think of. And that, that would give me something to entertain me if it ever got a little bit draggy. But it didn't get that draggy.
No.
And it wasn't that offensive at any point.
Yeah, no, if anything, I think the riffers did a better job of calling out some of the offensive tropes that were happening inside of the movie. So that was actually really helpful. I mean, there was some women things that were problematic, but, I think that's always true.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a few things that were a little iffy, but whatever. It was mostly fine.
Mm-hmm.
They were just little isolated moments. It didn't feel like a big thing. Unlike the movie, which, wow. The movie had some problems. Specifically, it had a racism problem.
Oh, yeah. Not that that's unique to the 60s.
No. But it shows up in a very specific way here where the scientist has a maid, Eulabelle, and she is every stereotype about a black Southern maid who, believes in voodoo, and all the white characters make fun of her for that.
Oh my gosh.
And,
yeah.
Doesn't know what she's talking about, but does manage to solve the problem by accidentally spilling sodium onto a sample of it and seeing it explode. And it's like, Eulabelle, you've solved it. And she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And blah, blah, blah. And it's just really, really tropey in the worst possible way.
Yes, although she also solves the whole problem with voodoo, right? Because everybody has a voodoo doll from her that's helping to solve what's going on too. It's like, what?
Yeah.
What? Yeah.
Yeah. It's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's nothing about the actor.
No, not at all.
Doing the best with what she's been given.
Absolutely.
It's a job and
this
all
is
that. But
simply a way that they're using the character inside of the movie. It's a horrible script for that particular character, but it's work, and I mean, how much work was there out there for somebody at that time who happened to be African American? Not as much as one would have hoped.
So the poster for The Horror of Party Beach described it as the first horror monster musical.
I'm sorry, what?
Mm-hmm. If you had seen that poster and then come to the movie, would you have been satisfied with it as a horror monster musical?
I guess I don't know what musicals were at the time. Musicals now are like, they're songs about what's going on, and the songs are sung by characters that give you explanation of what's going on and move forward the plot. In this case, the music is backdrop to what's happening inside of the movie, which is not how I view musicals. Were musicals different back then? Am I misremembering? I mean, there's no Surrey with a Fringe on top, but still...
Surrey with the Fringe on Top, that's Oklahoma, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's from 9 years before this movie came out, and the year after this movie came out, Sound of Music would be a pretty big deal musical.
Okay, so yeah, not a musical horror then, because there's no song about the creature. I mean, I would have expected that, and there's no song about radiation, and there's no song about scientists.
There's a song about the zombie stomp, though.
There are no the creature is not a zombie.
No.
Why would you have a zombie stomp inside of here? I mean, I understand that the Monster Mash was really an excellent song and really defines the whole Halloween era, but the zombie stomp was not going to compete with that.
No, I suppose not. Did you enjoy the music anyways?
I mean, sure. I mean, it was very... I don't know, it was very typical, like, Beach Boys type music, I guess. I don't know.
It was perfectly adequate music served with generous proportions.
Yes, that's true. I was actually surprised by how often the band kept coming in as if they were a part of the plot, Like, there are episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer where the bands who are playing at the Bronze comment on the vampire action that's happening in the town. I mean, they're passing things, but at least they're interacting with the actual plot of the show. The band in this case does none of that, right? There's no band. The band doesn't even really interact with the dancers.
They barely interact with each other.
I know. Well, I guess there is the one scene where it's the party and Elaine requests a song. So sure, I guess they do interact a little bit. But yeah, the band just seems like background.
Yeah, although, the same thing is basically true of Catalina Camper, but there at least you get different musicians playing and it just feels a little bit more organic rather than this endless beach party in the first half of the film.
So, and then suddenly there's a dance after people have died. I don't understand.
Are you saying you want me to cancel the disco at your funeral?
Please. Oh my gosh. No, I mean, it's really just a matter. No, I guess, sure, the dance must go on. But I guess I just feel like after Carrie murdered everyone inside of her high school, there wasn't a graduation. I mean, granted, there was only one person from the graduating class who remained, but still, like, there wasn't an end of the year celebration after that. And, there are just things that happen when horror strikes a town. You don't have a dance to then encourage the creatures to have more horror. I mean, I guess it only happens in horror movie. It's horror movie logic, right? Like, I'm going to run up the stairs and open the closet door where the creature is waiting for me. I'm going to attend the party that everybody says not to attend. I'm going to throw a party in order to encourage serial killers to come to my house. I guess we had to still have the dance so that there could be a continuation of the horror that was going on.
If we stop dancing, the horror wins.
I don't know. I think the horror was the dancing all along.
Do you find beach parties horrifying?
Yes and no. That beach party I find horrifying. I would not have wanted to cruise down in my roadster to attend that particular beach party. I mean, and it is a little horrifying when adults attend teenager parties, not as like chaperones, but as participants.
I mean, to be fair, this is, 1964 when teenagers looked like 40-year-olds look today.
I guess that's true. This is like Ring of Terror, where all the teenagers are like 40 years old.
So this is interesting in the long history of 60s beach films. It's not that long a history. The beach party craze only lasted for a few years, but this is fairly early on in that craze, and it's the first and kind of the only one that takes place on the East Coast.
Oh, I guess Jaws is not really a beach party movie, is it?
Well, this is what I was going to say, and you've completely ruined my reveal, but that's okay. Was that I was trying to think of other beach movies that take place on the East Coast, and the only one that I could come up with was Jaws, which was also a horror movie.
Yeah.
The other movies that take place on beaches on the East Coast are not really beach party movies. I mean, I guess Jaws isn't either, but like Mystic Pizza is not really a beach party movie. It just takes place on the coast.
Honestly, any of the spring break ones would count, right? Because when we think of spring break, I mean, Where the Boys Are doesn't take place on the West Coast, does it? That's an East Coast movie. I mean, I guess I don't know for sure, but when I think spring break, I think Myrtle Beach. The movie The Shag takes place on the East Coast, right? So like we're thinking of spring break movies. I think about those as being East Coast, Florida type things, because that's where I think of spring break occurring.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, Where the Boys Are takes place in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So
look at me remembering stuff.
There you go. You remembered a whole side of things. I mean, that is, again, because, yeah, the best I was coming up with was the Steven Universe movie, which...
Whoa.
Not really a beach film, though it does take place on a beach, sort of. And it is an East Coast beach.
Sure.
But, yeah. According to the Wikipedia article, certainly.
Scholarly journal.
Yeah. They list a bunch of movies that... do not take place at the beach as part of the beach party movie thing. So Village of the Giants gets included as a beach party movie, even though it's not a beach. It's barely a party.
I don't understand. Do you just like gather teenagers together in the 60s and you assume it's a beach party or something?
Yeah, kind of, because some of them took place at ski lodges.
Well, that makes sense, though, because, surfers ski and then they skateboard. Those are all one genre.
Yes, so there are beach parties that take place in Idaho.
Because Idaho is just like a California beach, which is just like Florida.
But none of them, except for this movie, took place on the East Coast, as far as I could tell. I tried to look through all of them, and this is the only one.
Wow. I would have thought that there would be more over there, because there are so many movies that take place on the East Coast.
Well, yes. Although I get the sense that, beach parties were often made as cheaply as possible, and most of the movie companies making them were based in Hollywood or California in general. So they would have stayed fairly local. And of course, the California beach party scene was much more exciting and I think in the news and whatnot than the East Coast beach party. Look, I grew up on the East Coast. You grew up in California.
It's true, West Coast.
Yeah. The idea of going to the beach for a good time, I think we had radically different senses of what that could mean.
Sure. I mean, I have to admit, I grew up in Northern California, so beach parties in Northern California are not the same as beach party movies because the coast in Northern California is not particularly warm, nor is the ocean. So, there are very few beaches that are those pearly white sands with an ocean that's warm enough that you can go swimming in it inside of a swimsuit, right? Like most people in Northern California are going in wetsuits, which is why you get more surfer movies set up there. Whereas Florida movies, Cape Cod, I don't understand. Massachusetts doesn't seem like a warm place in my mind. Maybe there's just too many movies that take place there in the wintertime clouding my judgment, but Jaws is up inside of that area, and everybody there is having a fabulous, warm 4th of July, and they're out in the ocean all the time. And, it's either cold winter or it is Jaws inside of Massachusetts in my mind.
I just remember that when I would go to the beach as a kid, I would get stung by jellyfish, and it was no fun.
Ooh, yeah, see, you got to watch the jellyfish tides.
It's terrible.
I know. Now they have charts for those things. You can avoid the beach on the right days.
That's the true horror of Party Beach.
The jellyfish.
Hey, everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 terrifying little facts about today's experiment, the horror of Party Beach. Go, Chris, go!
The Horror of Party Beach was directed by Delbert Del Tenney, who made a few of these low-budget horror films in the 60s with great names like The Curse of the Living Corpse and I Eat Your Skin.
Ooh. I Eat Your Skin was originally called Zombies and went unreleased for many years after it was finished. But then a distributor was getting ready to release a film called I Drink Your Blood and realized that with a little creative retitling, he could offer audiences a double bill of I Drink Your Blood and I Eat Your Skin. Who could resist?
John Lyon, who plays our hero Hank Green, did not have a long-lived career in the movies, but the other films he was in also had some great titles. He was in 1963's The Orgy at Lil's Place and 1965's The Sexperts, Touched by Temptation.
Alice Lyon plays the daughter of Hank's boss, Dr. Gavin, and if her last name seems suspiciously similar to John Lyon's, well, they were siblings. Sadly, Alice doesn't seem to have been in any other movies with fun names.
Eula Bell Moore plays Eula Bell, Dr. Gavin's maid. She was a Broadway actor, appearing in small roles in A Streetcar Named Desire and in the original production of Thornton Wilder's wonderfully weird play, The Skin of Our Teeth. This movie is her most notable film appearance, and sadly she passed away not long after the movie was filmed.
Where Catalina Caper gave us The Cascades, who had an actual hit song, this movie has the pride of Paterson, New Jersey, the Del Airs, whose 4 singles failed to chart.
In fact, at one point, Crow quips,
"Original soundtrack not available. You'll thank us."
But in 2012, Norton Records put out a compilation of the Del Airs music called Zombie Stomp, after one of the songs in this film. The album even includes the version played in the film, with the crowd noise and everything. They just taped it from the film soundtrack. Link in the show notes if that sounds like your jam.
Mike has a few words to say about some of the other parts of the soundtrack, though.
Monster immediately gets up and puts on his Metal Machine music.
Metal Metal Machine Music is a notorious 1975 album by Lou Reed. For that album, instead of singing about heroin addiction or taking a walk on the wild side, he made noise. Over an hour of guitar feedback and electronic noise.
Fans and critics were not impressed, and it was unclear whether Lou had intended this as a serious musical statement, or if it was a joke, or if it was a middle finger to the music industry, or if he was just high on goofballs. Now, while it was never going to climb the pop charts, the album eventually did find its fans, and, I admit, I kind of like it. I've only listened to the whole album once, but I liked it.
And then in 2007, the music ensemble Zeitkratzer arranged and recorded Metal Machine music for acoustic instruments, woodwinds and horns and strings and such, which is, at the very least, an interesting thing for some highly trained musicians to go and do. Link in the show notes if that's more your jam than the zombie stomp.
Two drunk men have a belabored conversation in the woods, and Mike jokes,
Vladimir and Estragon, the sitcom.
Vladimir and Estragon are the two lead characters in Samuel Beckett's play Waiting for Godot. If you haven't read or seen the play and only know of its reputation, then you might not know that it's very funny.
Bert Lahr, the cowardly lion from The Wizard of Oz, played Estragon in the original Broadway production, and in the late 80s the play was staged with Robin Williams and Steve Martin as Vladimir and Estragon, with F. Murray Abraham, artsy clown Bill Irwin, and Lucas Haas playing smaller roles.
At the end of the episode, Calopigius invites Brain Gaius for a post-feast visit to the vomitorium. The idea here is that wealthy Romans would go to special rooms to puke up their feast in order to make space for more feasting. The reality is that the word vomit in Latin means it spews out, and a vomitorium is one of those big tunnels you go through to get to your seats at a stadium. Crowds spew out from them after the big game, or after the gladiatorial fight.
And that's time!
Well, so there was a party that happened in this movie that did not take place at Party Beach.
You mean the slumber party with all of the girls who have the prank waiting for their fraternity boyfriends to come, and then instead the creatures come?
I mean that very much. And you can imagine my delight and surprise when at this slumber party, one of the young girls brings out a guitar and they all gather around and they start singing this dirge-like song.
This better be a strip folk song.
Whoa, yeah. They had lots of things to say about that song as it was going. Woo!
Did you recognize the song?
No, I've never been to a slumber party like that. There's no way I could have recognized that song.
Well, okay, I recognize the song, and it's certainly not from all-girl slumber parties.
Well, just because you weren't invited to an all-girl slumber party doesn't mean that you didn't have the equivalent.
What would the equivalent be?
An all-boy slumber party, I guess? Don't boys have slumber parties? Is that not a thing?
I don't know. I wasn't getting invited to them. I didn't have friends.
What?
I had Mystery Science Theater 3000. That was all the friends I needed.
Well, that's just like a slumber party with your friends. I mean, on Turkey Day, it's a 24-hour slumber party fest. And I'm sure that you sang that song.
Sadly, we didn't sing that song, which is called The Wagoner's Lad.
What?
But I know it because it is a song that was part of the folk revival movement of the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s. And specifically because it was included on the Anthology of American Folk Music.
The one that, what was his name? Alan
Lomax?
Thank you. Yes, the one that Alan Lomax did by doing recordings all the way around the country?
No.
Oh.
So this was collected by a guy named Harry Smith, who was a real eccentric type. He was born in Portland.
Portland, Oregon, or Portland, Maine?
Portland, Oregon. He was very West Coast.
Wow.
He was a filmmaker, magician, with a K.
What?
Bohemian and eccentric. And he was a big collector of old records, specifically old 78s when he was young, because he was born in the 20s, and that was what old records were.
Can I just ask, what is the difference between a magician and a magician?
A magician does parlor tricks that makes coins disappears, and a magician is somebody who interacts with like ritual magic, hermeticism.
Oh, so it's not like magic the way Penn and Teller or David Blaine would do it. It's something more along the lines of like occultist?
Yeah, so that term of magic with a K is an Aleister Crowley thing.
Okay. Thank you. I just needed to interrupt because I did not know the difference between those two.
That's fine. That's absolutely fine. Yeah. So he was one of these types. He was very much an outsider in a lot of scenes, and he decided to gather a bunch of recordings for Folkways Records.
Mm-hmm.
In 1947. It took him a few years to actually put them all together, but he was looking for recordings from between 1927 and 1932, which was an era when you could have high quality recordings,
mm-hmm.
but also it was very popular to put out these sort of folk records, these recordings that were done in rural parts of the country that were trendy for a few years and sold well and had become a sort of forgotten moment. And so he gathered together, and in 1952, this collection of 84 songs came out on, I think, 6 discs. At the time, it came out in 3 CDs
mm-hmm.
when it was re-released in the 90s, and I was able to grab a copy. It's a really remarkable collection. There's a lot of really great stuff in it, especially if you are a fan of early sounding records and early folk music. But also, if you get a physical copy of the anthology, the booklet that Harry Smith designed is everything that you could dream of. Wild typography, very curious descriptions of what the songs are about, and just a real treat.
I think that the biggest reveal of this whole segment, Chris, has been that you dream of wild typography. I'm not surprised, but...
I mean, yeah.
So this anthology was still popular enough 12 years later when this movie came out that people who went to see The Horror of Party Beach would have actually still been singing the song. It would have been happening at sorority parties, because it just seems like a weird interlude given the tone of the rest of the incredibly varied tone, but none of the other tones of the movie match up with this song being sung at a sorority sleepover.
Well, here's the thing. The anthology wasn't that popular. It didn't sell very well when it came out, but the people who bought it were important and influential. And so the songs from that formed some of the basis of the folk revival movement that people like Pete Seeger and eventually Bob Dylan and Joan Baez and so forth would be part of. And so they would often re-record these songs. So it's not that these girls at the slumber party would have listened to Buell Kazie's fantastic banjo and twangy Appalachian voice in the original recording from the 20s. They'd be listening to Joan Baez's cover of it.
That makes way more sense.
Or I guess cover's not quite the right word because it's a folk song. But yeah, Joan Baez had done a version of it. A few other folk bands had done versions of it. There's a remarkable recording of it that was put out by and I'm not sure how to pronounce this, the Kossoy sisters. They do these really remarkable close harmonies. They have a lovely version of the Wagoner's Lad that we'll link to in the show notes.
I was still just thinking how weird this song is for a bunch of sorority girls who are sitting inside of a room waiting for like their boyfriends to come over and prank them. You know, like when you see sororities inside of a horror movie, they're not singing something as serious as this. They're not singing folk songs. They're singing something that's very like poppy and very of the moment, right? And now they'd be doing something that's like electronic dance music or something. So it just seemed really odd that they were singing a song that seems so serious.
Yeah, it's a really interesting song, and especially that first verse, which goes, "Hard is the fortune of all womankind. They're always controlled, they're always confined. Controlled by their parents until they are brides, then slaves to their husbands for the rest of their lives."
Oh, yeah. See, not a sorority sing-song. I'm just saying.
No, and that's why it sounds so dirgy when they're performing it, because they're performing it very seriously, which it's not a trivial thing to be singing.
No, but it's often the case that folk music will take something super serious like that and sing it in a fashion that turns that idea on its head, right? Like they'll sing it more sing-songy. They'll have something that's a little bit more peppy where the lyrics are in complete like disjunction with what the music sounds like. And that's not what these guys did. It's the situation that's in complete disjunction with it, right? Like friends sleeping over and having a wonderful time together. So let's sing a song about our oppression.
Yep. Well, in fact, that's like the part of the song that is specifically about that in that abstract sense. The rest of the song is about a girl who has been courted by the Wagoner's lad her whole life, and her parents didn't like the boy because he was poor, and so this wasn't encouraged by the parents. But now the boy is ready to strike off on his own, and he's got himself his money, and he's ready to go out and be a wagoner, which a wagoner is, as I understand it, it's sort of the 19th century equivalent of a trucker.
Oh, okay.
Like you're going and wagoning things from town to town. And so you've got your equipment and you're heading off to do that.
Yeah. 18 wheels and a dozen roses.
Exactly. I don't quite know the logistics of how that worked, but that's my understanding of what he's doing and where he's off to. And so, he visits her one last time and she's like, "Oh, your horses, they're hungry. You should chill out for a little bit and just stay here a little while now that you are fancy and have a job." And he's like, no, they're fed. I'm going to go now. She's like, "Oh, but your wagon, it needs some greasing." And he's like, "No, my wagon is plenty greasy. I'm leaving." And that's the whole song. Like, that's it.
Wow.
She tries to convince him to stay for a few seconds more. And he's like, "Nah, you're spilling nonsense to me. And you and your family have never been that nice to me. And I've tried to woo you for your whole life. So
you didn't love me when I was poor, so you can't love me now that I'm rich."
Yeah, that's
Awesome.
the implication. Of course, it's never fully stated that way, but because a lot of these folk songs leave a lot of that to the listener to try to piece together. But that is the basic idea.
Nice. And the blame is entirely laid at the girl's doorstep, right? Because, awesome.
There's no blame really associated. It's just like these are facts, and then you are able to read into it. You're just getting the dialogue between them. Your parents don't like me because I'm poor, but now I work for my living and my money's my own. And if they don't like me, they can leave me alone. And she's like, "Oh, your wagon needs greasing. Come sit down beside me." "No, my wagon's fine. So farewell." And that's the song. Like, that's it. It doesn't say, "I'm leaving because you've been this," or whatever. It's just, he leaves. End of song. Yeah. I mean, there are a few different versions of it, and the Lomaxes actually, when they were collecting some information for this, decided that this song is related to "On Top of Old Smoky."
What?
That seems to have been something that they invented.
Yeah.
Because there's not a lot of evidence for the two songs being connected except from their field notes. So who knows what was happening there? I'm not an expert on it, but that's...
Well, in origins of folk music, will we ever know the origins of some of those songs?
Exactly. And there's a whole interesting conversation to be had about like the folk of folk music and how this was sort of invented by people who were not part of the folk, but who were looking for this romantic notion of exotic poor people that they would go and interview and take their songs and collect them and decide which counted as legitimate and blah, 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 and insist that they were coming from the folk rather than from individual authors and so forth. There's some interesting discussion to be had about the very concept of folk music, especially as it played out in America. But maybe there'll be some links in the show notes about that. But yeah, what a weird song to find in the middle of this movie. I was not expecting it. I love this song. It's so strange and mysterious and lovely. We'll have links in the show notes for my favorite versions of it. But go check it out, everybody. The Wagoner's Lad.
Chris, I just can't think of a way to transition into some of the weird body horror things that are happening inside of this movie, but I really think that we need to talk about some of the images of people that come up on screen and how Mike and the bots are reacting to them and societal expectations for bodies.
Okay, yeah, we could talk about that. Bodies shouldn't be scaly, and they shouldn't have little bug eyes, and they shouldn't basically be coming from the sea. And I am really feeling attacked by the whole eye bag thing, because come on.
Oh my goodness. I was thinking more of all of the comments that Mike and the bots are making about the dancers during some of the party scenes, specifically about body hair. There's so many comments about hairlines and bikini lines. And I mean, of course, there's always like objectifying comments that are the movie is making just as much as the bots and the riffers are.
Yeah, no, at some point they make a joke about Nair, which is, of course, a hair removal product.
Nair side, foam side. Nair side.
Did you ever use Nair?
No, sadly. I've never used, I mean, other than like shaving cream, I've never used hair removal products.
Yeah, and Nair is different than shaving cream, right? Shaving cream is something that helps to like prep your hair and to prep your skin for actually pulling a razor across it and shaving. Nair is something that chemically burns the hairs off of your body. So it is, I used it in the 80s because as a person growing up in the 80s and into the 90s, coming into, going through puberty and coming into what would become my adult body, like controlling the hair on your body is such an important thing that, of course, the messages came out inside of the media about it. And there was very jaunty and wonderful Nair commercials. I'm sure you remember the Nair for short shorts commercials.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Do you dare wear short shorts? Nair for short shorts.
That's right. And totally in line with what's happening inside of this movie, of course. And I can totally see why Mike and the bots are referencing Nair going through this, because we not only have men with no body hair on their legs. We have women who have like no body hair ever except for on their head. And then we also have the short where we have Mike inside of the super short shorts and we get to see his back, of course, like they're going to be only showing that from like waist up. And he has a hairless back. I mean, like we only have hairless people inside of this movie and inside of the shorts. And so just, anyway, Nair. I use Nair. It hurts. It's painful.
I that is something I read about it, that it both hurts and smells weird.
Oh, it smells horrible. Well, because it's chemicals, right? Like it's a chemical reaction that's trying to not just dissolve away the hair that's on your body, but it is also trying to affect your follicle growth so that you don't have hair growing for a few days. So, when you shave, you could like sneeze immediately afterwards or get some like, I don't know, something get cold and then all of a sudden you have goosebumps and then boom, you got little teeny bits of hair coming out, even though you just shaved yourself completely smooth, right? So Nair supposedly was going to make it several days before you are going to have hair growing, right? Because it's going all the way down to the root, which is not, and I'm told it's not as effective as waxing. I've never waxed my legs, so I don't know how it compares, but it was painful to use and really stinky. Oh my gosh, you're totally right. So, but it allowed you to be hairless for several days, thus meeting the social expectations and able to wear a swimsuit in public.
Oh man, a few days of hairlessness does not really sound worth it.
No, but why even have this expectation around body hair? I mean, I remember conversations inside of the 80s, inside of movies, comparing American women to specifically French women, I'm remembering, right? Like French women were women who did not shave. And so they had hairy armpits and they had hairy legs, and American women did shave. So there's things happening inside of movies where you end up on, the Mediterranean beaches in France, and you can immediately tell who's French and who's not. And it's always greeted by men just having expressions of horror in discussing it.
Yes.
And
no,
seeing
I remember
it.
I absolutely remember that. I remember being socialized into finding women with armpit hair disgusting. And then I remember having female friends who, as teenagers, did not shave their armpits and sort of realizing it and like, again, having been conditioned at first, finding it weird and gross, and then sort of catching myself and thinking, wait, no.
Why?
It's fine. It's clearly fine. Like, what? This is silly.
Yes. And like, it's interesting that you're having that reaction, even though like you didn't have any romantic interest in women, right? But you're still being conditioned to see what is or is not beautiful in some sort of way.
Exactly. Yeah. You're still negotiating with what you're being force fed as cultural assumptions that you should be making about this. Yeah.
It's totally weird. I mean, I did, go on to Scholarly Journal Wikipedia to look a little bit about like the history of hair removal and whether this is something that's just a 20th century type of thing. And of course it's not.
Romans did it.
And so did the ancient Egyptian, but they're doing it for multiple reasons. Part of it is a class issue, right? To show that you, by having completely smooth skin and having the time to be able to remove the skin from your body, you are obviously
not the skin. You're not
class.
removing the
Not
skin from your body.
Sorry, the hair.
It's got a very Halloween episode all
Yes,
of a sudden.
I know. Wow. The Attack of the Skinless Creatures. That would have been way scarier. It reminds me, of course, of the Event Horizon, which we talked about last time when we actually got to talk about wormholes, because there is skin being removed from that body. But that's neither here nor there. Anyway, ancient Egyptians, they used to remove the hair from their bodies. And part of why they did that is for lice.
Yes.
Right. And I'm sure that was the case in many of the ancient cultures. Now we have horribly smelling chemical products that will remove lice from your hair. Apparently we love those chemicals. There's no question. But so like removing body hair, not a new thing, not something that's exclusive to our current society, not exclusive to women either. I mean, that's something to absolutely be pointing out here. This isn't just a social expectation for me that my hair is going to be made in a certain way, and that I'm going to be hairless from the neck down, but also men have hair expectations as well. You and I were talking about this a little bit about facial hair expectations.
Yeah. So, we're old and we've lived through various eras of trendiness for men's facial hair,
Mm-hmm.
being that people were not so much into men having beards in the 90s, and people have been quite into men having beards for a little while now.
It's amazing to me that like having a ultra smooth face was something that was so wanted in the 90s, because that's also the era of like George Michael and the 5 o'clock shadow, right? So there were still various facial hair expectations then, but you're right. Like there was more of the wanting to have clean faces, and now it is like lumberjack style. I don't know. Amazingly, women's body hair has not changed, right? My entire life, the expectation for women has been clean shaven armpits, clean shaven legs, bikini line waxed, not like hanging out of your swimsuit, because that's horrifying. That's the true horror at Party Beach right there. I mean, and the bots are pointing it out not just on the women inside of this movie, but also on the men.
Yeah.
Which is surprising to me. Body hair expectations are amazing to me. They're calling it out inside of this movie, not necessarily in a mocking way for the body hair expectations, but definitely for the way that things are being displayed on this film. And it's kind of unfortunate. I wonder if now that we have a female host, some riffing would be addressing this more in a critiquing the expectations ways rather than in a critique of the bodies that are on display.
Yeah. Although we did have female writers back then.
That's true.
So you might occasionally get something that is sort of knowing in that way. But absolutely, as I've said many times, the default in this era is disgust at the human body and all its fleshiness. And that includes the hair. And that includes the sketch with Mike dancing near nakedly and how horrifying and disgusting that is.
Although sometimes I think about the bots as being like the children of the hosts, right? Like they're created by Joel. They're sort of his kids. They're sort of friends, but they also have this kind of parent-mentor relationship. And frankly, if a parent stood in front of me wearing Ken doll shorts and wiggled their junk around, I would be horrified too.
I mean, yeah, but I've met your parents. That strikes me as a very funny image.
Well,
to imagine your dad in a little Speedo shaking his moneymaker around is
it is
the
gross.
least
This is
likely
a
thing
gross thought. This has gone way farther than I thought it would when I brought it up.
Oh, it seems like you're getting a little hypocrite now.
That's fine. I'll live in my hypocrisy because, wow, I just went to a real scary visual place.
Mr. Charlotte's father, if you're listening to this, and I know you're not, it's okay. If you need to shake your moneymaker, you shake it.
Yeah, I guess so. Just not like the people at this party beach. Ooh.
No, you go to the beach. Your parents grew up in California and by the beach as well. They can go to the beach and relive their youth, shaking it and waiting for the horrors to come.
Oh, Chris, I don't have a final factoid for this movie, but I cannot talk about moneymaker shaking anymore. Maybe you have a final factoid?
I don't have a final factoid. Do I have a final factoid? I have one little tiny observation, which is kind of a silly gotcha. And then I've got one other observation about the episode itself. So let me give them to you real quick. First off, you might remember that there's a montage of newspapers zooming in with increasingly specific headlines that they make fun of in the sketch.
Mm-hmm.
If you sort of do the freeze frame thing and look at those newspapers, you'll see that all of the other articles are the same.
No.
Which is very funny. It's perfectly fine. It makes a lot of sense. And certainly they weren't expecting audiences to be able to freeze frame at that point.
No, they absolutely wouldn't have, right?
And even it might even make sense if like the headline is changing, but the rest of the articles aren't. If they're different editions of the same paper and they're just not updating everything, that could even make sense. And I'm not trying to like ding it in a Cinema Sins kind of way of saying this is inconsistent. I just thought it was very funny when I noticed it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The other thing I want to say is that once again, we've got a situation in a season 8 episode where Mike and the bots are complaining about something which they probably shouldn't be. There's a whole sequence where the scientist and Hank have figured out that the monsters are irradiated and that they can use this to get Geiger counters and find the monsters so that they can destroy them.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout this entire scene, Mike and the bots keep repeating, sodium, sodium. You forgot about the sodium. What about the sodium? Because earlier, thanks to the work of Eulabelle the maid, they had realized that pure sodium is what would cause the monsters to explode, because sodium contacting water causes a big boom.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly experienced this in my high school science class, chemistry class.
Mm-hmm. Where you get to blow things up in controlled circumstances?
Yeah, or the teacher would anyways.
Yes.
To get your attention. We were all sort of drifting off that day, and he just dropped a cube of sodium into a water, and it went bang. And we all were like, hello.
Chemistry's cool. I remember that now. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But they've already figured out that sodium is how to destroy them. And they even mention this later in the scene. What they're talking about in this scene is how to find them, which is a different question entirely. How to find them before they kill again. So sodium has nothing to do with it. But Mike and the bots keep repeating sodium as if the movie has not been paying attention. Once again, Mike and the bots are insisting that the movie isn't paying attention when it is, and they seem to not be paying attention. It's a thing that keeps happening in this era of the show, and it makes me very upset.
Sure. Although, to be fair, they're solving the problem of where to find the monsters when they don't yet have the materials to actually destroy them. And isn't that what puts Elaine inside of danger in the first place? She finds the monster without a way to destroy them. That's ridiculous.
Well, that's certainly true. But the point is that sodium in no way would have solved this problem.
No, that's entirely the case. Yes. But it seems like they needed a plan for both. And they were only focusing on having a plan for one of them. So I'm glad they eventually came back to the round. I mean, it's a good thing Mike and the bots were there to remind them over and over and over again. If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you want to invite us to your beach party, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, and we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you, and like our randomly selected supporter, Lisa Marie. Thank you, Lisa Marie. For as little as $1 an episode, you can be like Lisa Marie and help us research and record this show. You can join us in a friendly Slack where we all hang out and live stream our reactions to new episodes. And you can listen to all our super fan bonus bits. Find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/120.
Well, hopefully I have managed to edit this episode in time to get it out for Halloween, because we're running a little late, but that's okay. So that means Halloween's effectively over by the time anyone hears this, and we should start thinking about what episode we're going to be doing next.
Ooh, that sounds like an excellent thing to look at. And we're going to be looking at Season 5, Episode 3, Swamp Diamonds, with a short, How to Go on a Date.
Ooh, I can't wait to find out how to go on a date.
It's going to be riveting.
Does it involve riveting? Everybody does want to date Rosie the Riveter.
I want to date Rosie the Riveter.
So it's actually a riveting instruction movie, and then
And then we all get to go on a date with Rosie the Riveter. Everyone dates the same person, which actually becomes really complicated.
or really efficient.
Ooh, good job, Rosie. Maybe I'm rooting for her.
All right, well, we'll do an entire segment about Rosie the Riveter next time.
I can't wait.
But until then,
Don't spend too much time at the vomitorium.
and we can always listen to our Foster Brooks books on tape. Take it away, Theme Squad. It's just a show.